Cam, you sent me a text this week talking about transfer portal where Baylor sits right now and other teams in the Big 12. Your way too early projections next season featured a very interesting matchup in the Big 12 title. I'll get to Baylor in a second where you can explain why you think the Bears will be there. But BYU in Arlington is your pick. Why as of today, I mean, there's plenty of time to change it, but why as of today do you have the Cougars making it to the title against the Bears?
Man, I love their trajectory over the last few years. I really like the defense first style. And I don't think we've seen the best from Jake Retzlaff yet, because I was a guy who was really hyping up Rocco Becht coming into this year. And I like Rocco Becht, and he had a solid season, and he got his team to the Big 12 championship game. There's not much that separates Rocco Becht from Jake Retzlaff. All right. Not a lot at all, if anything. And so I see that kind of Iowa State mold that finally broke through and got back to the Big 12 championship this year and finally won 10 games for like the first time ever. That mold, I think, is what's going to win long term in the Big 12. Arizona State was built a lot from that as well. Like Arizona State kind of found their footing offensively in the back half of the season. And that's why they beat Iowa State. That's why they were a deserving Big 12 champion, because they have more firepower than the Cyclones. But it's kind of starting with that defensive base. And BYU's been building that the last really kind of the back end of the 23 season where they almost got the bowl contention, and then all throughout 24. And I'll give you a little sneak peek for why I picked both these teams, because the way I love looking at this is, okay, especially in a great race like the Big 12, if the season were a week or two longer, who would have been there? And I think Baylor would have been there. And I think if not BYU, then Colorado would have been there. And Colorado loses a lot more than BYU does. Is that good enough? You like that?
In that bowl game, the Colorado BYU bowl game didn't give me a lot of confidence in the Buffs compared to a BYU, especially if we're talking trajectory. The Baylor Bears, maybe we can get more into how the transfer portal plays into this, but the Baylor Bears, why Baylor in the Big 12 title next year, aside from the fact that you are the host of Locked On Baylor?
Well, objectively speaking, they were probably the best Big 12 team the last, I don't know, let's use an arbitrary number here, 6 weeks of the regular season. How about that? How about the last 6 games of the regular season? If they weren't the best team in the Big 12, they were certainly on the medal stand. And they bring a ton of important positions back. They need some help at receiver, but with an offense in place with Jake Spavital, that's, I don't want to say just purely plug and play, like it's just a system type thing, but it's an attractive system for good receivers to come into and to thrive in. I think they could well have the best quarterback in the conference returning in Sawyer Robertson. If Cam Scatterbo goes to the NFL draft, they probably have the best running back returning in the conference in Bryson Washington. And Dave Aranda is shaking up this defense, which it probably needed a little bit earlier. But he's fired some guys this week, which we do talk about on Locked On Baylor today. And so clearly they're trying to shore up that side of things. They've brought in some plug and play starters through the transfer portal. Obviously, I know Baylor and their dealings a little bit more intimately than some of the other teams. But again, I go back to that model. Back up the championship game 2 weeks. Who's going to be there? Doesn't mean anything for 24, but it might just mean something for 25. And I think Baylor would have been there. They were the hottest team in the league at the time. And they bring back probably the most in terms of skill positions, probably a little bit more than a team like Kansas State, Arizona State.
Let's talk schedule, because on Locked On Big 12, always fun to mention as many Big 12 teams as possible and their outlook next season. For BYU, Portland State, Stanford, East Carolina. That's not a very hard non-conference. That's a pretty easy walk your way, especially with that Stanford game being at home. Walk your way to 3-0. Then home games against Utah, West Virginia, TCU, UCF. 2 of those teams are going through coaching changes, UCF and West Virginia. One of them being Utah, had a lot of roster turnover. You stole a couple of their guys in the offseason. And then West Virginia, or I should say TCU, seems to be a pretty deadly team next year. Provo, a tough place to play. You go on the road against Arizona. They're not very good. Colorado, we don't know what they look like without Shedeur Sanders. At Iowa State is tough. At Texas Tech is tough. At Cincinnati should be a win for the Cougars. That's at least a 9-3 I say at least.
Could be, yeah.
Or it could be lower, but that's a pretty solid 9-3, 10-2, 11-1 for BYU based off of just what they did this season.
Mm-hmm. And I don't want to spoil the back half of this, but BYU, according to the 2024 win percentage, you take out the FCS teams because that's a different story, 13th toughest schedule in the Big 12. There's only 16 teams in the Big 12. Yeah. Their schedule is 13th.
Is that good or bad? That's not.
It's not great. It's good for them.
And what we know is that today in college football, as long as you go 12-0, you're going to be fine. Just go 12-0. It doesn't matter.
Sure, just don't lose a single game in the Power Conference. Yeah.
The games, we talk about road game at Iowa State. That's tough. At Texas Tech, they could be very, very much in the hunt for a Big 12 championship. But for Baylor, they avoid BYU. Mm-hmm. Baylor avoids
until Arlington.
Until Arlington. Baylor avoids Texas Tech next season. Your non-conference, though, is tough. Auburn and SMU. Let's take a second and camp out right there. There's a real chance that Baylor starts the season 0-2 and still finishes 8-4. Still has a very good football team, but that is an insane way to open up in August against the Tigers of Auburn and then at SMU.
Yeah, it's a great way to open up, I think. And I'm not like in my bed at night terrified of Auburn. I think they're a good team. I think they'll be better than they were this past year for sure. And I'm glad you faced them week 1 instead of week 2. So that they don't play, Samford, who Baylor plays week 3, and just figures it out and comes into McLean with all kinds of confidence because SMU is going to be SMU. They're going to be confident. They just went to the college football playoff. So Auburn at home, I like that you're playing them in week 1. And I think Baylor's still probably going to have a better team, if we're being honest. But we know how Baylor does, in terms of playing down to their competition. And then SMU on the road. You've seen that stadium, Drake. We've called high school games in bigger stadiums than that, man. It's not like
stadium more
field advantage.
Lack thereof, you could say.
I mean, look, SMU's a really good team. I don't want to kind of poo on them for that, but it's not like you're going into this really tough road environment. I mean, it's not quite as easy as going into Houston, but it's not going into Provo or even Stillwater on a good day.
Then the conference schedule on the road against bottom end of the Big 12 in 2024, Arizona, Cincinnati, Oklahoma State. Those are all, you're licking your chops. You go at TCU. That's a tough game. Obviously, you come back home over the course of next year to play Houston, UCF. They're both question marks. Utah, question mark. Arizona State without Cam Scatterby might even be a question mark. And then Kansas State. What do you make of the conference slate for the Bears?
It's the 15th easiest schedule in the conference, 15th out of 16, which is awesome. But I mean, obviously from a fan standpoint, like I hate that we're not playing Tech. And if you just look at the home games, it actually leaves a lot to be desired from a fan standpoint, right? Like you have one in-state game and it's Houston for home games. Like that kind of stinks. That's not going to bring a lot of juice to the place, but it also means you won't be playing as a road team in McLean Stadium at any point during the year. So obviously the Utah matchup is going to be big if it's early in the year. And Arizona State, I'm really excited to see when that falls in, because I do think Arizona State isn't going to have a steep fall off. I think they are going to be competing for the conference championship next year as well. So that could be a really fun statement game. And if it's late in the season and they're both doing well, that could be kind of a tune-up that Baylor needs before a potential Big 12 championship or a potential college football playoff game.
Coming up, the Big 12 robbed the SEC of a quarterback on a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Baylor crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is the #1 app right now to make your bets this NFL playoff and college football playoff season. From big upsets to game-winning drives, the NFL playoffs are better with FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need to live bet. You have same-game parlays, and so much more. I go to the site. I see that Texas is a 5.5-point underdog against Ohio State, and I believe that Ohio State will win that game by a touchdown. Boop. That's it. Just type in the little numbers right there, and you can bet that on FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets. That is FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.